Welcome to Airailimages Video Magazine number 31. I'm Fred Johnson and I'll be your host. A specially painted duo of Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers carried Japan's peace negotiators to the American base at Ie Shima on August 19, 1945. The Japanese emissaries were whisked to Manila from Ie Shima in a Silver Army Air Force's C-54. The stir created by the operational use of nuclear bombs on Japan accelerated the activity of factions within the Japanese government that either favored surrender or argued against it. In the days following the August 9 bombing of Nagasaki, conventional bombing of Japan continued by as many as 800 B-29s. Word came from Japan that surrender was near. But surrender talks did not come quickly. Years later, in an interview, Enola Gay pilot Paul W. Tibbets said he was asked how quickly a third atomic bomb could be available. Tibbets had a B-29 pilot waiting at Wendover Army Airfield with the third bomb in a B-29 ready to fly to the Pacific if tasked. But that third atomic strike never came. On August 19, 1945, Japanese peace emissaries flew to Ie Shima in a pair of stout Mitsubishi G4M bombers, Allied codename Betty, that carried special markings to ensure their safe passage into Allied airspace. Hastily painted white overall, the Japanese bombers carried green crosses instead of red round national insignia. The paint was still tacky in places when the bombers landed at Ie Shima. In preparation for the arrival of the Japanese aircraft on Ie Shima, the Americans specified the bombers' call signs would be Bataan 1 and Bataan 2, recalling the infamous Bataan Death March of Allied prisoners. When Japan responded with different call signs, they were rebuffed. The two Betty bombers made their way to Ie Shima along a route clearly delineated in a Japanese message to the Allied command. While inbound to Ie Shima, the surrender planes were met by US P-38s and B-25s. Ie Shima was sliced by three major military runways. To make certain the Japanese flyers landed at the correct airstrip, huge white crosses were painted to show the proper place. The fate of Japan and the Allies hinged on the outcome of this flight. Suddenly, a loss of radio contact sent both of the white bombers into a holding pattern until it was resolved. On Ie Shima, the American airmen crowded against a hastily erected barbed wire fence to get a first look at the arriving Japanese negotiators. Walter Schur, a B-24 instrument technician with the 90th Bomb Group, said the crowd was largely silent as the Japanese deplaned. Silent until one member of the Japanese delegation emerged from his bomber carrying a bouquet of flowers. At that moment, some in the crowd told him in succinct terms just what he could do with his flowers. 4 years of war were pent up in the men watching history unfold before them. The few steps from the Japanese surrender aircraft at left to the waiting C-54 must have been an eternity in the August sun on Ie Shima for the surrender delegation. American military police stood at 20-foot intervals beside the path to the C-54. Less than an hour after arriving at the American base, the Japanese were aboard a shiny C-54 Skymaster on its way to Manila to arrange the surrender. The pilots of the painted Japanese bombers remained with their aircraft on Ie Shima. They were visibly and understandably edgy about being on a huge American base under those circumstances. The natural apprehensions and curiosity of both sides on Ie Shima would mature into a long-standing post-war collaboration between Japan and the United States in the coming months and years. When the delegation returned, their exit was marred when one of the Betty bombers ran into a ditch. The remaining aircraft left with the surrender documents, but a fuel leak put it down in the surf near the Japanese coast. The Japanese surrender delegates aboard that airplane finally made it home. During a trip to Okinawa in 1984, I made an effort to travel to Ie Shima and visited the memorial to war correspondent Ernie Pyle, who died there during the fighting on April 18, 1945. One could still get a sense of what Ie Shima must have been like in 1945 for those who battled on it, as well as those who waited for the Japanese surrender delegation to arrive. Call it a shock cone or a shock collar or a vapor cone. It's one of the most spectacular phenomena associated with fast jets and moist air. When air pressure drops due to a fast-moving airplane, the air cools and can condense moisture if enough moisture is present. Dramatic shock cones cannot be equated with flying faster than the speed of sound. A subsonic jet, with displaced air moving over its wing in the transonic speed range, can produce dramatic condensation patterns. The phenomenon begins with a shock wave that increases air pressure, followed by a dramatic low-pressure expansion wave over the wings of the aircraft, and then another high-pressure shock wave after that. It's that abrupt low pressure accompanied by a drop in temperature that pulls the moisture out of the air and makes an ethereal and momentary cloud, often hard-edged, around a fast-moving yet subsonic jet. We are indebted to a lot of U.S. Navy photographers for the spectacular still images. The F-15 video comes from a surprisingly humid day in the desert at Edwards Air Force Base. There's no Warbird Roundup for 2020 due to the pandemic, but we can enjoy sights from the 2018 show when 5 P-40 Warhawks flew in impressive formation over Idaho. You can support museums like the Warhawk Air Museum and the Plains of Fame Air Museum in times like these by becoming a member. And that wraps it up for Airailimages Video Magazine number 31. Thanks for watching.